And for more on this, joining us now is Jeff Guzzetti, former FAA and NTSB investigator. He's also, of course, an NBC News aviation analyst, and also U.S. retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who served as the commander of U.S. Army Europe. All right, Jeff, I want to start with you. There's been a lot of open sourcing analysis of this plane going down, and there's a couple things you said that you're able to assess from that data that, you know, people can see on sites like FlightAware and tracking. One of those is aircraft control ability. Can you explain to us what that means and what it could indicate in the course of why this plane went down?
Certainly. Good morning, Christina.
Good morning.
Yes, the ADSB recorded radar data indicates that the airplane was pitching up and down and having difficulties with controlling its altitude and its airspeed. And that, to me, indicates a controllability problem. And it's also seen in this video here that you're showing, just prior to the impact, you could see the airplane pitching up and then pitching down, its nose going down, and then trying to pitch up again as it attempts this emergency landing. So controllability is absolutely an issue. And there's also open source indicating that the crew even indicated that they were having controllability problems. So to me, you've got many different pieces of evidence indicating a problem with the flight controls and the crew's ability to control the airplane.
And General, first the Kremlin said that they think it was a bird strike that caused the crash, and then just this morning an aviation official with the Russian government said that Ukrainian combat drones were in the area where the plane was intended to land. What do you make of those statements?
Well, first of all, why was Grozny Airport even open? I mean, if there were, as Russia has acknowledged, Ukrainian drone strikes going on in the area, why would a commercial airport still be open? To me, this is, of course, we're going to have to wait for the investigation, but I think the evidence points towards an air defense weapon that was used, the holes in the fuselage, the effects that Jeff just described so well. Those are consistent with an air defense missile strike, the type that detonates before it actually hits the aircraft, and that's what creates that sort of fragmentation. And look, it is complicated when you've got drones and a lot of things in the air, and if you don't have disciplined, well-trained air defense crews, these are the kind of things that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, because even here in the U.S., you know, we've seen airports as big as LAX shut down if there's a commercial drone somebody bought at Radio Shack too close to the flight line. Jeff, I also want to ask you about MH17, which was that Malaysian Airlines flight that was shot down by Russian-backed forces. This is all seeming very familiar to that case. There was a long investigation by Dutch investigators. They did say it was due to weapon systems that were from Russian-backed rebels, but the Kremlin never acknowledged that. How does that impact how investigators are going to look into this crash, and are we expecting it to follow a somewhat similar trajectory?
Well, Christina, the MH17 tragedy shed a lot of light on exactly what General Hodges just talked about. Conflict zones, commercial airlines flying in and out of conflict zones. And there were recommendations made out of the MH17 Dutch investigation that apparently were not heeded in this event, because General Hodges is correct. Grozny should have been closed. There was warfare going on at the time. The Dutch investigation of MH17 looked at the same splatter pattern of holes in the fuselage and did their best to present the facts from the black boxes, from the fuselage damage, to prove that a Russian separatist-backed missile brought down that Boeing 777. So hopefully the same type of International Civil Aviation Authority investigation will occur with this crash. It would be difficult to sweep this crash under the carpet and not conduct a thorough investigation like they did with MH17.
What do we expect they're going to be able to see on those flight data recorders? And it sounds like they're in the hands of the Kazakh government. Do they have the kind of investigators needed to analyze that data?
You know, ironically, I don't think they do. They rely on Moscow. They rely on a very robust accident investigation entity in Russia to download those. So Kazakhstan may decide to send them elsewhere, but we'll have to see what they do with both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder.
Yeah, that could complicate the investigation. General, I also want to ask you, if this was a Russian shoot down, do you think it was accidental? Do you think it was on purpose? And what does that say about the regime one way or the other?
Well, I meant to say earlier, kudos to the pilots, by the way, who managed to do what they did after being hit. That's why 25, 35 people survived this terrible incident. We're never going to get transparency from Moscow. They have never been clear on these kinds of things. They'll deny, distract before they would ever say, yeah, we screwed up here. But I think that's exactly what happened. Unless it turns out that there was one of the passengers was somebody they really wanted, I think this probably was a mix of incompetence and confusion in a very complicated situation. And, we put a lot of effort into our air and missile defense crews, training on positive identification, making sure you don't have accidentally hit your own aircraft. And of course, we know this still has happened just a few days ago out in the Red Sea. So it is difficult, and you've got to have transparency, disciplined, well-trained crews when you're doing this.
Yeah, the plane was headed to Chechnya, but we have no indications there were any high-profile targets, Muslim extremists that the Russian or any other government might have wanted to go after. Jeff, I also want to ask you, yesterday, Russian authorities briefly closed all 4 of Moscow's airports and another one about 100 miles from the city. And this was on the same day the Kremlin warned against speculating what might have caused, the plane crash. What do you make of that? What is your take on why they would have done that?
Yeah, Christina, I don't know. Maybe that was coincidental, but why close airports in Moscow? And ostensibly it was due to safety reasons. I don't know if the two were related, this accident and the closure of those airports in Moscow. I really can't. Right now, I can't draw any kind of potential coincidence between the two.
Yeah, fair enough. I appreciate that. General, I want to ask you, generally, we were talking about it a bit earlier, but I'm sure you've been on flights around the Middle East where you look at the map and the plane is literally going all the way around a particular area or particular country, and that's because the pilots are trying to avoid conflict zones. But given the state of the world and global affairs right now, it seems like there are more and more places perhaps commercial flights shouldn't be going. What do you do about that? Is it safe to get on a commercial flight in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East? Should airlines be taking this threat more seriously?
I think that, yes, it is safe to fly in the airlines on which I travel. And I'm in an airplane probably the minimum twice a week or somewhere here in Europe where I live or back and forth to the States, of course. But these companies like Lufthansa, for example, or United or others are very careful about where they go. We know, for example, if you want to fly from Frankfurt down to South Africa, there is a very, very narrow window of where you can go because they are concerned about Russian mercenaries that are down in so many of the African countries. So airlines are very aware of those, and which is why they are careful to avoid it. Obviously, this adds to the cost and it adds to the fuel consumption, but nonetheless, I think airlines, when they say that passenger safety is number one, they're serious about it. Certainly, that's my experience here in Europe.
I also want to ask you, General, this all comes after Moscow unleashed another series of attacks on Ukraine on Christmas Day, really hitting the power grid, putting, 500,000 people into the dark and cold. Between these attacks and the plane crash, does this tell you anything about the state of play in this conflict?
Well, what it should remind everybody that this is Russia and this is who you're dealing with. They don't give a damn about loss of civilian life. They are deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure and civilian populations all over Ukraine. Obviously, these are all violations of international law, but they know that they probably are not going to pay a real price for it unless we decide that they have to pay a price for it. I have to say, I thought it was a pathetic response when people were outraged. Oh, my God, they did this on Christmas. Well, of course they did. They kill innocent Ukrainians every day of the year. And whether a child gets killed on Christmas Day or in the middle of the summer, it is a war crime. And so when we talk about negotiating with Russia, somehow we've got to find a peaceful solution. This is who you're dealing with. And we should have our eyes wide open that they will not live up to any agreement. They never have, unless there's a very, very strong, compelling peacekeeping force that can make them do that. Otherwise, they'll do what they have always done, which is thumb their nose at it. They'll play along for a year or two, wait for us to lose interest, and then they'll do what they want to do. So I'm not against negotiating, but we have to be smart and clear-eyed about who we're negotiating with.